So I haven't seen hardly any videos on K-SYSTEM.pro's big brake kits that they offer for a few different cars. This one specifically is going on my E46 330. But I just wanted to give an overview of the parts that are included and give people a look at the parts and then run through some minor changes that I made. So first off, these are the Brembos that I opted for. I believe these are the Megane Trophy Brembos. I'm just showing one set, but these are Renault parts there. So you've got your Renault marking there, Brembo. It's obviously a brand new caliper, so still has some of the plugs in it for the brake hose. Really nice. And yeah, it came in a genuine Brembo box. So it's definitely a legit part. The next one is the steel adapters that they provide. So these ears mount to the stock knuckle on the E46. And then these are the threaded holes that radially mount the caliper. So yeah, it's a radial mounted caliper. So these are the holes for that. Then I opted to not get brake pads, but he still includes the brake hardware. So you've got the spring clip and then the two pad pins that retain the pads. And then he also supplies a stainless brake lines with the copper washers required for them. And this is a replacement for the E46. And then mounting hardware for the caliper and the caliper bracket. So for the caliper, these M14 by 1.5 socket head cap screws are provided. They're machined down on this side because when you mount the caliper in the ear here, you need all the thread engagement you can get. And the ear of the caliper is here. So, or sorry, the ear of the knuckle is here. So it gets pretty close and you don't really have any room to stick the bolt past the hole, the end of the hole. To mount the bracket to the knuckle, he just provides, these are factory bolts for the E46. I'm not sure if other kits use the respective OEM bolts, but these look like genuine BMW bolts. They look like the bolts that came off that are on the car right now. And then depending on the rotor thickness, so for this kit, it can use the stock 330 rotors, which are 25 millimeters thick, or you can use E46 M3 rotors, which are the same diameter, but they are 3 millimeters thicker. So he's got, he provided these 1.5 millimeter shims basically to position the bracket in the correct spot. So the caliper is centered on the rotor. So in my case with the 25 millimeter thick rotors, I will need these spacers to get the caliper centered about the rotor. Now some changes that I am looking at implementing are, since I'm sticking with the 25 millimeter rotor and the Renault comes with a 30 millimeter rotor, I wanted to make sure that I wasn't going to be overextending these pistons at all. And then even if they are not going to fail, it'll still stiffen up the system a little bit if they're not sticking out quite as far. So I had these 1.5 millimeter titanium pad shims cut out. And so these are going to just go on either side of the pads here and here. They'll take up a little bit of room. They'll also prevent a little bit of heat dissipation through the pads to the caliper, and they're 1.5 millimeters thick, so that'll get me up to that thickness, that kind of effective thickness that I'd see if I was running the M3 discs. So there are options out there for 0.5 millimeter and 1 millimeter thick shims, but since I could run the thicker shims, I had these laser cut. I just had one set laser cut, so I've got enough for my car. I've got 2 per caliper, so I had 4 cut out. If you're interested, I could look at getting more made. If If people are interested, just let me know, and maybe we can get a small run going if there's enough demand for it. And then another change that I looked at making was using different bolts to mount the caliper to the bracket. So I think these use an 12mm hex, and that's not a tool that I normally had. I've got it in my toolbox, but I wanted to see if I could look for more standard size hardware, and I ended up going with these bolts from the junkyard. So I believe they're from a 7 series, and they mounted the bottom of the front shock, but this is the BMW part number for them. It's 0711990645, and originally it was a 90mm bolt. Is the same diameter and thread pitch, and 14 by 1.5, but I did have to grind these bolts down. So I cut them with the angle grinder and cleaned up the threads on the end, but they are now the exact same length, and these have an 18mm hex on them. So that's a size that's used on several parts of the rear suspension. So it's a socket that I've got. It's a 18mm socket, so it's pretty easy to find on a 3/8 drive. So I was wanting to use a little bit more common hardware, and then I also had to grind down the OD so that it would fit here in the counter bore for the bolts. So the flange, so they're flange bolts, and that diameter is bigger than the socket head cap screws. So it's a little bit more of a robust bolted joint as well. So I did one test tighten on the bench with the socket head cap screw, and it did leave a little ring of deformation there when I torqued it up. So I didn't like seeing that. You know, I wasn't sure if it was leaving a little bit of an impression here in just the aluminum body. So with the larger diameter, the flange bolt doesn't leave that mark, so it distributes the clamping load on a larger surface area there. So it's a more robust joint there. Maybe it's fine with this, but I didn't like that it was leaving a groove there and a depression from the smaller diameter socket head cap screw depressing down in there. And then one final change I made was I found some thicker or larger diameter spacers to account for that 330 disc, the 25mm thick disc. So these are the little spacers there, and then I found some larger diameter but also 1.5mm thick washers. So you got more clamping surface, kind of the same deal. It's going to be a more robust bolted joint, and I'll feel better about it not coming loose. And these bolts, especially, once the caliper is on, they're kind of captured, so they're hard to get. I'll run over to the setup on the bench and we can roll through the assembly. So here's the assembled brake caliper and bracket on the bench. I've got a spare knuckle that I test fit everything on. So I've got my new bolts here, and then over here I've got the washers there. So the larger diameter washers. So yeah, you can see how captured the stock bolts are. And then with my setup, I'm using a 12mm spacer to work with the wheels. They are Apex Arc 8s and a 17 by 9.5, 35mm offset. So here you can see the titanium shims assembled with the pads. And then these are new brake pad pins that I just got in. They're Mr. Pink pins. So instead of being pressed into the caliper body, so when you press in the pin, this spring collar here is actually, that gets pressed in, and that gets tight in the bore here. and that's what holds your pin in. His pins have a cotter pin or an R pin here that goes through a hole. So the pins are cross drilled. They're stainless pins. And a lot of people in the UK speak highly of them. He's in the UK, so but he does ship to the US, but they speak highly of them and that they don't have issues with them seizing. And then the fact that they are a loose fit in there, so the whole pin can move slightly, but it sounds like only good things from them. And I don't know if I'll probably run the spring clip at least for a little bit to. But I don't know if I'll actually need it. They'll be a little noisy on track, but not sure how necessary that is. And I'll put a wheel on real quick and we can look at the clearances there. So here's the 17 by 9.5 inch Apex Arc 8. And they're notoriously bad for spoke clearance to brake calipers. So with this is what it looks like with the 12 mil spacer. So there's a few millimeters there. I feel okay about that. And then on the mounting bolts, down here, let's see if we can get a good look at them. So that's a 1/2 inch drill bit, so a 12.7 millimeter shank. So it's got room there. So if you were to space out the caliper 10 millimeters for the CSL discs, you'd probably have room. It'd get close, but probably have room to mount those. So that's what it looks like with the wheel. And I'm excited to get these on the car. Thanks for watching.